How's it going, fight fans? MMA Nook here, and today we're going to go over Dariush versus Tsarukyan this Saturday, December the 2nd, 2013. So, just like before the other entries we had done, we will go through the main card, as most of the prelims and early prelims usually consist of fighters that are just coming up or that unfortunately don't have much going on for them. Not to say that they're not going to. Obviously, this is where prospects are usually made, but the main focus, of course, are the fighters on the main card so that they could stamp their name in the MMA history books and proceed to do so in their careers. So, respectfully, without further ado, we will start off with Punahou Soriano versus Dustin Stoltzfus. I had heard of Dustin Stoltzfus, and to be honest, I had heard of Punahou as well. I have heard their names. To be honest, I haven't paid much attention to them because, if I'm not mistaken, they haven't fought that often in the UFC, but their fights have been pretty impressive. So that is probably one that I don't have too much of a say in since I haven't been analyzing or watching them that thoroughly due to their inactivity. So then we will move on to Clay Guida and Joaquim Silva. Clay Guida is UFC staple for many, many years at this point, decades, I'm pretty sure. Clay Guida, what else is there to say about the Carpenter that not many have said already? He's still sticking around. He's still getting W's. He is just a miracle worker all around. But this might be a little tricky as he's going against a very tested Joaquim Silva, who actually had a very close fight, in my opinion, a lot closer than I think people gave him credit for previously versus the headliner, Arman Tsarukyan. So I do want to say that it's going to be heavily favored for Joaquim. He showed himself to be a tremendous, well-rounded fighter. He got tremendous hands, takedown defense, takedowns himself are really good. But Clay Guida, I mean, at this point, there's a reason Clay is still in the main card. He has still got it. And the last few fights, he has definitely pulled victories where not many people suspected him to be. So I personally do have Joaquim Silva a little high for this fight as well, but I will be shocked but not surprised if Clay Guida ends up pulling the victory somehow, some way. Clay Guida still got it, and to be honest, at this point, just like Bobby Green, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a number next to his name in a few months if he pulls up the outset from Joaquim Silva. So Sean Brady versus Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum making his entry back into the welterweight division after a decent middleweight run. After Kelvin's fight with Izzy for the interim title, when Robert's fight fell through with him, he had a tremendous performance against Israel. Many did accredit him to being one of the top echelon of the middleweight division at that point, but it just seemed like Calvin was cursed by injuries so often, so much so. And of course, that kind of stuff piles on to his in ring performances. So unfortunately, Kelvin wasn't able to make up that pressure, that star power, and skill wise, as far as well that he had coming into the middleweight division and repeat it when everybody started moving up, moving down too frequently. So Kelvin coming down, I do feel like this is a good thing, but also a bad thing because Kelvin was quite obviously outsized in the middleweight division, and I don't mean that just by people that were heavy, the people that were heavier than him. The people that he was fighting were significantly larger than him and way more muscular than him. You look at people like that Kelvin Gastelum used to fight. He fought the Michael Bispings. Yes, Yoel was still there. He had fought Israel Adesanya in a tremendous performance as well. So he did have the potential at that point, but then middleweight just started getting a lot bigger in volume, physically bigger. We saw people like Poatan, Alex Pereira come in, and then Izzy as well too. If you look at him now, his last performance with Sean Strickland compared to his debut, Israel got physically bigger. He got a lot bigger. Like he piled on a lot of muscle mass to himself. It's significant what Robert Whitaker did when 170 when he compared to so if we compare Kelvin Gastelum and Robert Whitaker's welterweight runs to their middleweight runs, Bobby Knuckles got significantly bigger as well. If you compare welterweight Robert to middleweight Robert is significantly muscular. He definitely put up a build when he became the middleweight champion and stayed and is currently at the top, but he's significantly bigger. Yes, he's a lot smaller still, in my opinion, than the middleweight contenders like Cannonier, like even Vittori maybe. I know that Robert had beautiful performances against them both, but he is still, in my opinion, one of the smaller middleweights in the division. That just goes to say how skilled Robert is, in my opinion, with his grappling, his techniques. He is just a phenomenal fighter. And even someone like DDP. DDP is ginormous. He is ginormous. Gonna reiterate it, Calvin. It was just not that size for them. I feel like he cut most of the weight in terms of body fat, not so much as actually size, because Kelvin always was, in my opinion, the smallest middleweight in the top 15. So I'm glad that he's coming down. But the bad part is too is because I did always feel like Kelvin had a lot of weight problems in his previous welterweight. I know this one's going on in the other ones, but this is pretty significant too, and I have something to say about Sean Brady as well. Is that Kelvin Gastelum did have a lot of weight problems. He's actually been posting on social media recently that he's, of course, dieting, making a huge turnaround, that he plans to make a better, more thorough run in his welterweight uh, re-debut. But I hope it goes well for him. I know that definitely he's been around the game as well. Not obviously as long as Clay Guida, but his performances and his battles in there definitely I feel like took more of a toll on him than they would have done to Clay, just because I feel like Kelvin was in a little more back and forth battles. Of course, just like at the iteration with Izzy as well, got pieced up pretty thoroughly by Robert Whitaker, as well as that fight with Chris Curtis was very close. Chris Curtis is an example of how I feel like Kelvin should have been in that division. Chris is around the same height, I believe, as Kelvin, but Chris is just he's a specimen. Like he is built quite literally differently than Kelvin Gastelum. So that was a bit of a run on, but I do feel like it's very significant that he's going down in weight after so much injury, so much downtime, so many significant losses in his middleweight run. But I hope it goes well for him. Not to take anything away from Sean Brady. Sean Brady, I still feel like is a tremendous fighter, which really did poke a hole into Sean Brady's game plan. Where if you can keep him up, it's kind of significant that Sean doesn't have a lot of stand-up games. So I do feel like the time he most likely took away was kind of improving his hands. Bilal was able to expose that, and I feel like people might use that as a recipe to beat Sean Brady. But so long as Sean kind of puts a little more effort into his hands, starts throwing a little more combinations, improves his boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, whatever you want to call it, I think he can do a lot better. Again, not to take anything away from Bilal. Bilal is a phenomenal fighter, uh, contrary to what many people say. But with all due respect, Bilal isn't really a boxer, a kickboxer. He had great hands against Sean Brady, but Bilal isn't really known for his hands. He's known for his takedowns, his control time, submission attempts. Bilal has good hands, but testing them against someone like Sean Brady, who also doesn't have phenomenal hands, it was kind of a bit of a given there that Sean Brady has a weak point on the feet. So eager to see this matchup. It's definitely going to be a statement for both of them. Sean Brady's still here. He beats Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum is proving a point if he comes back down and takes his W over Sean Brady. So I can't wait to see this. I know I went on a little more about Kelvin, but I feel like this fight is more significant for Kelvin than it is for Sean Brady. Not to take anything from Sean Brady, I still feel like this is important, showing that he can knock down a middleweight top contender that's been around for years on end. So Rob Font versus Davison Figgy, who is making his bantamweight debut. This fight, I know Davison definitely got outclassed by Brandon Moreno during his last championship fight, and to be honest, I kind of was waiting for this debut a lot sooner than I originally anticipated. But I guess Davison wanted to take the maybe the Robert Whitaker approach. I wanted to put on a little more mass because with that being said, Davison was big for his weight class, but he's a lot smaller when you look at people in the bantamweight division. I mean, just look at just take into consideration some frames. Rafont I'd say he's medium sized for the division, but look at someone who's a lot bigger in that frame, whereas Marlon Moraes, when he was in there, he was shorter, but he was a little more stocky. And then just like the current champion in Sugar Sean, where he's a little more stocky, but he's a lot taller. So a lot of those feats I feel like are made up in one way or another. And I feel like if Davison wants to compete in the bantamweight division, he definitely did have to put on a little more mass because undoubtedly going to be fighting people significantly bigger than the people he used to ragdoll around, punch a little harder. Is that there's quite literally weight classes for a reason. So I want to say that the only reason Davison took so long to come back, especially in the bantamweight division after he declared it, is because he wanted to put on a little more muscle mass. So hopefully Deuce de Guerra can come back, get a W. But then Rafa off a spectacular performance against Adrian Yanez, who very much needed it. Rafa did take a few hardships previously before that. Rafa is a tremendous boxer, undoubtedly belongs in the top 10 as well, but he just had some hiccups I feel like he needed to get around. Most likely work around his takedown defense, which I feel like can work in his favor if he's fighting someone like Davison Figueiredo, who does have phenomenal hands, but would also use takedown attempts and submission attempts around to be able to get to his hands. So long as Rob Font can stuff a few takedowns for Davison, who needs to prove he's strong to be in there, I feel like Rob Font can take the advantage in the feet. We clearly know that Rob Font has phenomenal hands. He's proved it on many occasions, and hopefully it goes. Uh, I do believe Davis Figueroa has a chance if he has bulked up. If he has not, I think it might be a little bit tough for him. But also a tremendous fight. This whole card in general is stacked. But I'm much so excited for the main card, as many of us are. And then Jalen Turner, number 12 in the lightweight division, versus Bobby Green, one of the new ranked lightweights in the UFC. Definitely Bobby Green having a few upsets to his name. Nothing upsetting about seeing a legend make it into the current rankings for sure. Bobby Green, staple in the UFC as well. But pulling out Dan the Hangman Hooker, this was supposed to be a tremendous fight, but unfortunately, Dan had a bit of an incident with the hand he broke last time during the fight, ironically enough, against Jalen Turner, who is actually subbing in for the Hangman. So, this is going to be a tremendous fight as well. Definitely well warranted for these number 12 and number 13 contenders to be fighting, but I hate to say this, as proud as I am for Bobby Green to be here, when I started rewatching MMA, he was definitely on the cards. He caught my attention. Words of wisdom, words of inspiration. Bobby Green is a tremendous fighter for sure. As mentioned, been fighting a long time. Has notorious fights versus Dustin Poirier, significant others who are currently in the top 15 as well. But I believe Jalen Turner is all around a better fighter, just kind of how I would have guessed with Dan Hooker as well. Is that Bobby Green has great hands, but he has a tendency to keep them very low in order to persuade a lot of head movement, head punches that he can pivot out and then of course return a jab, a hook, however he sees fit during the situation. But Dan Hooker and even Jalen Turner proved when he fought Dan Hooker that they have tremendous, tremendous, tremendous hands. Jalen Turner does not waste effort when throwing a punch. He picks and chooses very, very carefully. So if he doesn't feel like he can hit Bobby Green, he's not going to overextend. Not to mention Jalen Turner's amazing reach for this weight class. He doesn't really have to overextend because his reach is crazy. It's just outstanding how far Jalen Turner can reach. So I do feel like Jalen Turner can get the shots in through Bobby Green's defense. Bobby Green, I don't think this is going to deter him from the lightweight rankings by any means. He might have to prove himself one more against a non-ranked opponent who's making a climb, but I do feel like Bobby Green has the potential to stay here for a bit. I know that his last victories were definitely upsets, but it's not something that he didn't coordinate or plan, right? He plans his shots, he takes his chances, and they come out in his favor. However, I just think the higher he becomes, the higher chances he gets in this superb stacked lightweight division. It's just going to be a lot harder for him because those chances don't present themselves so easily with the elite of the elite in the UFC's lightweight division. So I will have to give this to Jalen Turner. Actually, I don't believe I gave this previously as well. I'll have to give this to Jalen Turner. I'll have to give this to Rob Font. This one I will have to give to Kelvin. Uh, Most likely because I feel like contrary to what I said previously, he is coming down from a bigger weight class, so it's a bit of a given that his mass just most likely happened up there. So I do think he has wrestling to stop the jiu-jitsu from Sean Brady. So definitely Kelvin Gastelum can present himself with this, and I did mention this one. I believe Joaquin Silva is going to win. So then we go on to the main event, which, in my opinion, is definitely good enough to co-headline a pay-per-view. I was clearly headlining a non-pay-per-view here. Benil Dariush, number 4 in the lightweight division, versus number 8 Arman Tsarukyan. So Arman Tsarukyan, as we know, he debuted with the current champion of the lightweight division, Islam Makhachev. And I saw that fight live, and I was just impressed with everything that Arman Tsarukyan did, because this was a fight that I believe was tremendously close. Now, I do believe Islam got the nod at the end very thoroughly as well too, maybe by like a point, maybe even two. But I do believe that Arman Sarukian had given him the toughest fight, possibly even more than Volk, with all due respect to Volk. Yes, I know Volk is a tremendous champion, pound for pound ranking, well deserved, but Arman Sarukian, I believe, is more impressive because I think he was 23 when he first fought Islam. And take note, this is an experienced Islam. That was an experienced Islam, because Islam, yes, he has a potential to grow just like every other fighter does. But I believe the Islam that we saw back then is almost around to the Islam we've seen capped at this point, or near cap. So Arman Sarukian is a lot more impressive, capable of what they do on such short notice, to the person who would then become the current lightweight champion. So tremendously impressive. And then we have Benny Dariush, who was on an 8 fight win streak, but unfortunately fell a little bit short versus the former lightweight champion and Charlie Olives. So I do believe Benio. I believe Benio when he says he wasn't himself that night. With all respect to Charles, Charles put up a tremendous performance. I feel like that was the best version of Charles, and I feel like the version we will see fight Islam is a better version of himself as well, compared to the time where he lost the title. Now, with that being said, I give Charles the benefit of the doubt when he claims he wasn't himself when he fought Islam for the title. And I also believe Benio when they say that they weren't themselves, because there's a lot of stuff that when you see Charles, when he fought Dustin, when he fought Justin, and even when he fought Michael, Charles' movements were just almost almost unanimously the same compared to when he fought Islam. And yes, of course, he's afraid of the takedown a little more from Islam. But some things were a little bit off too. Even the way that Charles, I felt like, would throw his hands, and even the way that he would kip kicks a little bit to kind of keep Islam at a distance. So, yes, again, Islam is a tremendous champion, he's a phenomenal champion. I can't wait to see his next defense versus most likely Charles Oliveira. But I am giving that excuse to Charles because I also want to apply it to Benil. Whereas if we see Benil's last performance versus Mattel's Gamrot, is that Mattel's take down every 0.5 of a second. He shot for a shot every 0.25 of a second. Reached for a leg, tried to get a takedown. Benil stuffed all of it with little to no problem, to be honest. And Mattel's Gamrot was touted to be the next big prospect after Charles debatably would lose to Islam again. So Mattel's takedown every time, and then Benil would just stuff it. Now, I feel like that in comparison, because we have a good opponent like that in Matas Gamrot, who also fought Arman Sarukian, is Arman did stuff takedowns as well, but I feel like Arman struggled a bit more in that aspect, whereas Benil was able to get a little more crafty, a little more submission attemptive than Arman Sarukian. Now, not to say that that can't just be applied because they're fought the same person, some things worked in one way and the other ones didn't. So this is where I actually tip my hat off to Armin, because Benio also complimented him in this regard as well, and in declaring that Armin Sarukian definitely knows how to mix stuff up a lot better than Mateos. I feel like Mateos Gamrot's wrestling is so elite that he's so confident in it that he doesn't have to set it up. Whereas Armin Sarukian's wrestling is good enough, but he has to set it up with his hands, which also gives him a little bit more credibility on the feet as well. So this is going to be a tremendous fight. I feel like Benio definitely does have no fear of being on the ground. As we've seen as well, Benio has been improving his hands. Now, I will also give that non excuse to Benio, where I feel like Benil's hands have been improving, but in comparison to the typical lightweight fighter who isn't a striker. Now, we'll compare that to Matos. Matos isn't really the best boxer, kickboxer in the lightweight division. And most of the people that Benil has fought, respectively, he's kind of dealt with them on the ground or avoided throwing hands up until some beautiful shots by Benil were pinpointed and planned. So Benil doesn't have the best hands in the world, but he's so well rounded. I feel like he's able to set up hands to a takedown. He's gonna think you're taking down to box you perfectly on the feet. And I feel like these individuals are so much alike, but I do feel like the experience will actually come in Benil's favor. Um, and I do feel like Benil might actually pressure him. Ironically enough, what I just said with the hands, because Arman Sarukian most likely will want to take this on the ground. Benil is tremendous in the ground, so it's not going to be too prosperous for Arman, where I feel like Benil just barely takes Arman on the feet, sets some things up beautifully, and gets him with the beautiful shot.